There is something interesting about a police uniform. At first glance, it is just a clothing, a shirt, a pair of trousers, a beret, some badges. But in a country like Kenya, where the relationship between citizens and the police has been complicated for decades, a police uniform is much more than clothing. It represents authority, it represents state, and whether we like it or not, it represents the way Kenyans experience government at street level. So today, when President William Ruto unveiled the new Kenyan police service uniform at Kiganjo, the interesting question is not simply, does it look better? The bigger question is, why change the uniform now? And what exactly is this change supposed to achieve? Because there is actually a much bigger story here. President William Ruto unveiled the new General Duty Police uniform on Friday, August 28th, at the National Police College in Kiganjo, Nyeri County, during the passing out ceremony of newly trained police officers. And visually, the change is quite obvious. The previous deep navy blue uniform is being replaced for general duty officers with a lighter sky blue shirt, dark navy trousers, and a matching beret. The new design applies to both male and female officers, while additional provisions have been made for expectant officers, including maternity uniforms. But here is where things become interesting. This is not simply Ruto waking up one morning and deciding that Kenyan police officers need a new fashion statement. The National Police Service says the change follows a public participation exercise conducted in 2023. According to Inspector General Douglas Kanja, officers expressed dissatisfaction with the deep blue uniform and preferred an earlier design. The new uniform is therefore being presented as a return to an option that had previously been considered and approved, and that detail matters because the current navy blue uniform itself is not ancient. It was introduced in 2018, so Kenya is essentially changing police attire again that after only several years. And naturally, Kenyans are asking why. Now, I think there are two ways of looking at this. The first is the practical argument. Police officers spend long hours on patrol, standing in the sun, dealing with crowds, traffic, crime scenes, and sometimes extremely difficult working conditions. A uniform therefore has to be functional. It has to allow movement, it has to be comfortable, it has to be suitable for Kenya's climate, it has to make officers easily identifiable, and it has to accommodate different categories of officers. That is why the maternity provision is actually more significant than it may initially appear. For years, police uniform discussions in Kenya have tended to focus on equipment, salaries, vehicles, weapons, recruitment, and command structures. But the everyday working environment of officers matters too. If you want professionalism from an institution, you also have to think about the conditions under which the people inside that institution work. So from that perspective, improving the uniform is not inherently a bad thing, but there is another side. And this is where Kenyans are right to be skeptical. A uniform does not reform a police service. A different color does not change police culture. A new beret does not prevent police brutality. And a smarter looking officer does not automatically become a more accountable officer. That is the uncomfortable truth. Kenya's police reform debate has never really been about clothing. It has been about power. It has been about accountability. It has been about how police officers use that power when dealing with ordinary citizens. It has been about investigations, arrests, use of force, professionalism, command responsibility, and respect for constitutional rights. And President William Ruto himself today placed the uniform unveiling within the wider question of police reforms, saying his administration is implementing recommendations from the Police Reforms Task Force. That is why I would not judge this new uniform by how it looks. I would judge it by what happens after the cameras disappear. Because today at Kiganjo, everything was ceremony. The officers were smart, the formations were precise, the uniforms were clean, the president was inspecting the parade. That is what a passing out parade is supposed to look like. But the real test begins on Monday. The Inspector General has indicated that the new uniforms will begin being worn by general duty officers from August 31, with the rollout continuing progressively across the country. The General Service Unit and Administration Police are expected to retain their current operational uniforms. So this is not actually a complete transformation of the National Police Service. It is primarily a change affecting general duty officers within the Kenya Police Service. That distinction is important. And then there is the money question. Already, opposition figures have questioned the procurement process and raised claims concerning a contract said to be worth nearly 3 billion. Now, we need to be careful here. A political allegation is not a proof of wrongdoing. There has to be documentary evidence, procurement records, and proper scrutiny before anyone can conclude that money was misused. But that does not mean the question should simply be dismissed. In fact, government should welcome transparency here. If public money has been spent on thousands of uniforms, Kenyans deserve to know how much was spent, who supplied them, how the supplier was selected, and whether the procurement followed the law. Because the fastest way to kill suspicion is transparency, not political shouting, not accusations of propaganda, not just just open information. Interior Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen has pushed back against criticism, saying the uniform was selected through public participation and that the rollout will be gradual rather than an overnight replacement of every existing uniform. And perhaps that is the sensible approach. There is no reason to throw away usable uniforms simply because a new design has been introduced. If existing uniforms are still serviceable, a gradual replacement makes more economic sense. But there is also a political dimension to this. President William Ruto's government has increasingly talked about police reform, professionalism, and restoring public confidence in law enforcement. And symbols matter in politics. A new uniform is visible, people can see it, we can talk about it, we can compare the old and the new. It gives government something tangible to point to when discussing reform. But that is also why expectations become dangerous. Because once you tell citizens that you are reforming the police, people naturally expect more than a new appearance. They expect behavior to change. They expect police officers to treat suspects with dignity. They expect investigations to improve. They expect complaints against police officers to be taken seriously. They expect police officers themselves to be protected when they act professionally. They expect better equipment, they expect better welfare, and most importantly, they expect the Constitution to mean something when an officer is dealing with an ordinary Kenyan on the roadside. That is the real standard. So, personally, I don't think Kenyans should spend too much energy arguing over whether the sky blue shirt looks better than the navy blue one. That's the least important part of this story. The real issue is whether this uniform becomes the visible face of a better police service. Because if it does, then in a few years nobody will remember the color. They will remember that police officers became more professional. They will remember that citizens could walk into a police station and expect to be treated with dignity. They will remember that officers were properly equipped, properly trained, and properly held accountable. But if nothing else changes, then this will simply become another uniform. And Kenya has changed police uniforms before. What Kenyans are really waiting to see is whether the government can change what happens underneath the uniform. That is where the real reform begins, and that is where the Ruto administration will ultimately be judged, not at Kiganjo, not at the parade ground, but out there on Kenyan roads, in police stations, in estates, in markets, during demonstrations, during arrests, and those ordinary encounters between an officer wearing the uniform and a citizen standing in front of them. The uniform has changed. Now Kenyans will be watching to see whether the police service changes with it. Thank you.